They found her on the kitchen floor, and they told me the call went out straight away. Odell Pryor next door heard her go down through the wall and looked at his clock, because that's what a man who worked 40 years on the railroad does when he hears a noise. 10 past 2. The dispatch log has the call coming in at 2:21. I want you to sit with those 11 minutes, because I've been sitting with them for a year. 31 years I did this job, and the whole of it was getting to strangers inside 8 minutes. My name is Frank Bracken. My wife is Loretta, and we've been married 46 years. And she was lying on my kitchen floor with a broken hip while somebody in my house decided when to pick up a telephone. Nobody in that kitchen knew that a crew writes down what time they were called. If you've got somebody in your family who started explaining things to you instead of telling you, stay with me. Subscribe to True Deceit Stories, and I'll tell you all of it. Now, the beginning, and I have to start with the tablets, or none of the rest makes sense. Loretta was diagnosed in the spring of 2019. Breast, and it had already gone to the bone by the time anybody found it, which is how it goes with that. She's had 6 good years out of it, which nobody expected, and she'd tell you herself that 4 of those were very good. Bone pain is its own thing. It isn't like other pain. It doesn't come and go with what you're doing, and you can't get away from it by lying down. And by the end of 2023, she was on a long-acting opioid, 90 tablets at a time, 1 month at a time. I ran that lockbox. That was my job in this house, and I was careful about it, because I've been to enough calls in enough houses to know what happens to a bottle of those left on a counter. Our son is Wade. He's 45. He's a decent enough man who has spent his whole life about 2 decisions behind where he needed to be. Wade and Shelby moved in with us in the autumn of 2023, and the reason they gave was to look after us. That wasn't a lie, and I want to be fair about it. Loretta was getting worse. I'm 72, and there was a stretch that summer where I hadn't slept properly in 9 weeks. Shelby had been a pharmacy technician for 11 years before the kids came. She knew what she was looking at with the tablets, and she was good with Loretta, genuinely good, and for about 7 months, I thought we'd been lucky. I'm telling you that, because otherwise you'll think I'm a fool. There was nothing to see. There is never anything to see. That's the entire problem. The first thing was a phone call in May from a clerk at the pharmacy on 3rd, whose name I never got. She said she was sorry to bother me, and that she just wanted to check something on Mrs. Bracken's account. Because we'd been collecting 8 days early 4 months running, and that the system flags it. I said I'd look into it, and thanked her. Then I hung up, and I did not think about it again for 9 days. I want to be honest about those 9 days because they're the ones I can't get back. A woman I didn't know had picked up a telephone to tell me something was wrong in my own house, and I heard it as an administrative question. You'll do the same thing. Everybody does. Why would you not? When the first piece of information arrives, it doesn't arrive labeled. Nobody rings up and says your daughter-in-law is stealing your wife's morphine. They ring up about an account. I counted the box on a Sunday at the end of May when they'd taken the kids to Shelby's sisters. 22 tablets. There should have been 90 less the 11 days she'd had. Call it 68. I stood at my own kitchen counter and counted them into my hand 3 separate times because I've been counting drugs since 1991, and I have never once got a count wrong 3 times. 22. Now here's the thing I want you to understand, and it's the reason this story is not about money. A person on that dose who is short does not simply have less pain relief. They go into withdrawal on top of the cancer. Sweats, cramping, the legs, and it comes on about 14 hours after the last one. I'd been watching my wife have bad nights since March. I'd been putting it down to the disease. It wasn't the disease. It was arithmetic. and I'd been in the room the whole time. Do you know what that does to a man who spent 31 years getting to other people's houses in 8 minutes? I asked Loretta about it the next morning, and I did it wrong. I asked her straight out whether she was getting all her tablets. And she said yes, of course. And then she looked at the table and said that she'd been making them last a bit, on the good days, so there'd be enough for the bad ones. She'd been rationing, herself. For months, she thought the shortfall was the doctor being careful with her. That's what she'd been told, she said. And I'm going to give you this exactly. I didn't want to make a fuss when everyone's doing so much for me. That's a 70-year-old woman with cancer in her spine, apologizing for the amount of pain she's in her own kitchen, to her own husband. I said something about talking to the doctor, and I went out to the porch, and I sat in the frame of that swing with no seat in it for about 40 minutes. The bank statement was in June, not hidden. It came in the mail with our name on the envelope because it's a joint account Loretta and I have had since 1984, and there were 4 transfers out of it in 5 months to an account ending in the same 4 digits as my son's. 11,000 and change. So now I had 2 things, and only one of them made me want to sit down. The money I could almost hold. Wade's business went under in 2022, and he's been finding his feet ever since. And if my son had come to me and said, "Dad, I'm drowning," he'd have had it. And he knows that, which is its own kind of sad. The tablets weren't Wade. Wade wouldn't know a short count from a long one, and Wade has never in his life been able to look at his mother in pain. Somebody in that house was doing 2 different things, and only one of them was desperate. I did nothing for 3 weeks, and I want to tell you why, because it's the part people argue with me about. If I'd stood up in that kitchen in June with a bank statement and a pill count, here's what would have happened. Shelby would have cried and said she'd been taking a few for her back and would pay it all back, and Wade would have believed her because he needs to, and the tablets would have stopped going missing for about 6 weeks, and then it would have started again, somewhere I couldn't see it, and I'd have lost the only advantage I had, which was that nobody in that house thought I'd noticed anything. I'm not proud of that reasoning. I've turned it over a lot since, but I'd already lost 9 days in May, and I wasn't going to lose the rest by being satisfying. So I said nothing, and I counted the box every Sunday, and I wrote the numbers in the back of a spiral notebook I kept in the truck. On the 19th of July, I nearly threw the whole thing away. And this is the part I have to tell you honestly, even though it does not make me look clever. The hospice nurse who'd come to do the assessment, a woman called Cheryl Boudreau, sat with me on the porch afterwards, and we got to talking, and I ended up telling her that I thought medication was going missing. She didn't look shocked. She said she sees it in maybe 1 house in 6, and then she said the thing that put me on the floor. She said, "Frank, 9 times in 10, it isn't wickedness. It's a woman who hasn't slept in a year taking 2, because her own back's gone and she can't afford the doctor. And then it's 4. And then she's in trouble and too ashamed to say so." She said, "Be very sure before you take a family apart." And I sat there and thought about Shelby getting up at 2 in the morning to change sheets in April, which she did, which I watched her do. I nearly stopped. I want that on the record. For about a week, I had myself convinced I was an old man with a notebook building a case against a tired woman. What changed it was not evidence. It was the 28th of July, in the front room. Loretta said she was having a rough day, and Shelby said something to Wade, not to me, thinking I was out at the truck. She's not going to be here long enough for it to matter. I was in the hall. I want to be careful describing what that did, because it's easy to say I saw red and it wouldn't be true. What I felt was the opposite of red. Everything went very quiet and very orderly, the way it used to on a bad call, because that sentence isn't the sentence of somebody who's ashamed and in trouble. That's a person doing sums about how long they need to keep something up. Cheryl was right that it's usually the other thing. It just wasn't, here. The fall was the 14th of August. I was asleep. That's the fact I have to live with. I'd been up with Loretta until nearly 4, and I'd gone down at about 12:30 in the afternoon, and I was out. Loretta got up to get water because the tablet she should have had wasn't there. She went down between the counter and the table and broke the neck of her femur. Odell heard it through the wall at 2:10, because our kitchen backs onto his den, and that house is 1950s brick, and you hear everything. He told me later he waited to see if there was voices, and there were, so he figured somebody was seeing to it. The crew came in at 2:31. The call was logged at 2:21. Loretta was on that floor for 21 minutes, and for 11 of them, there was another adult in the house who knew. I woke up when the truck pulled in. I came down the stairs and there were 2 paramedics in my kitchen, and my wife was on the floor with a folded towel under her head that hadn't been there when she fell. And Shelby was standing by the sink, saying that she'd found her and called immediately. I heard that, and it went in somewhere and stayed there, and I did not react at all, because there were 2 young people on the floor with my wife, and my entire working life says you do not become a problem at that moment. I helped them package her. They were good. The girl on the airway side was maybe 26, and she was very kind to Loretta, and Loretta apologized to her twice for the trouble. My wife, with a fractured hip, on a floor, saying sorry. Now, the hospital. Hip fracture, surgery, on the 16th. And a set of numbers I'd have written up as a safeguarding referral myself if I'd read them on somebody else's chart. She was dehydrated. Her pain score on arrival was a 9, and she'd told the crew it had been like that, on and off for weeks. And the discharge summary from the previous month had her on a dose that should have had her at a 3 or a 4. None of which proves anything on its own. I knew that even standing there. They kept her 6 weeks between the ward and the rehab unit. 6 weeks is a long time in a house. By the 2nd week, there were brochures on my kitchen table. Shelby had done the research. 2 places, one out past the interstate, respite care that could go long-term, and she'd already had a conversation with somebody there. And there was an inquiry form with Wade's signature on it, because as she put it to me, in that soft voice she used for hard things, standing in my own kitchen, Frank, you're 72 and you can't lift her anymore. And she wasn't wrong about the lifting. That's how these things work. Every single sentence sounds like sense on its own. I went to the sheriff's office on the 2nd of September. A deputy took it. Then a detective named Ray Guidry came out and sat with me for half an hour, and he was decent, and he did not patronize me. He asked what I had. I said my wife's medication has been going short for 4 months. There's $11,000 gone from a joint account. And she lay on my kitchen floor for 11 minutes after a fall with somebody else in the house. He asked how I knew about the 11 minutes. I said my neighbor heard it and looked at his clock. Through a wall? Through a wall. And I understood exactly where I was. He explained it without making me feel stupid. A woman with metastatic cancer fell in a kitchen, which is the most ordinary thing that happens in this country. The family member says she called right away. The neighbor heard a bang through a wall and thinks it was 10 past. The tablets are in a house where 4 adults live. The money is a family transfer out of a joint account, and my son's name is on the receiving end, he said. Mr. Bracken, if I bring this in today, what I've got is a family dispute and a lot of grief, and I'd be doing you harm. Then he said, get me a document. I drove home, and I sat in the truck outside my own house for a while, because he'd told me exactly what to do, and he didn't know it, and I'd known it for 31 years. and had been too far inside the thing to see it. Everybody in that kitchen on the 14th of August was looking at my wife. Nobody was looking at the two young people writing. Here's what a run sheet is, and it's the only technical thing I'm going to tell you. When a crew goes to a call, they complete a patient care report. It has the time dispatch received the call, the time they were assigned, the time they arrived on scene. Not approximate. Logged by the system, because that's how an ambulance service gets paid and audited. And there's a narrative. Free text. The crew writes the scene as they found it, and they write what the people present said in the words they said it. It is a medical record. It belongs to the patient. Loretta can ask for it, and I'm her healthcare proxy and have been since 2019. I have signed about 4,000 of those in my life, and I have never once, not one time, had a family member ask for a copy. I put the request in on the 8th of September. It cost nothing. It took 11 days. It came in a brown envelope and I read it at the kitchen table with the house empty. Call received. 14:21 hours. On scene, 14:31 and, in the narrative, written by a paramedic named Villanueva, in the flat plane register they teach you, there was this. Patient found supine on kitchen floor, folded towel under head. Female relative on scene states, patient fell about 5 minutes ago, and that she heard her go down and came straight in. 5 minutes. Odell Pryor's clock said 2:10, and there was one more line, and it's the line that made me put my hand flat on the table. Patient states she has been going without for some weeks and asks crew not to tell her husband. She'd told them. My wife told two strangers in a moving ambulance because she couldn't tell me. And they wrote it down because that's the job. I sat in my kitchen with that piece of paper for a long time. Then I went and saw the oncologist about a hospice package, and I was polite to him for 50 minutes. I need to tell you about my father here, quickly, because it belongs in this part and nowhere else. Emmett Bracken died at 94 of bone cancer, at home, over 5 months, under a doctor who would not write enough and would not be argued with. I was 30 years old and 3 years on the ambulance, and I knew precisely what my father needed, and I was polite to that man every single week for 5 months. Because that's what you did. I have never forgiven him, and I have never forgiven myself for being polite. So sitting in an office in September, being agreeable to another doctor about my wife's pain, 31 years later, was not nothing. I want that said, and then I'll leave it alone. He signed the hospice referral. Cheryl Badro would start on the Thursday. Loretta came home on the 22nd, and on the Sunday, at the kitchen table, with Wade and Shelby both sitting there, I said two things out loud. I said, Cheryl starts Thursday, and from Thursday she handles all the medication. She brings it, she counts it, she signs for it. And I'm frankly glad to be shot of the responsibility. And I said the pharmacy's delivering the full month, Tuesday afternoon, and it'll go in the box. Then I asked Wade about his truck, and we talked about the truck. I have gone over that Sunday more than any other part of this. I sat at a table and told a woman that there was one night left and exactly what was in the house on it. I called Rob Guidry on the Monday morning and told him what I'd said and why. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, Mr. Bracken, don't do anything else. Let me make a call. I called my son on the Tuesday afternoon and asked him to be at the house at 11 that night, and not to bring Shelby and not to ask me why. And he said, okay, Dad. That's all. He didn't ask. I've thought about that too. Tuesday the 30th of September. The delivery came at 4:10. 90 tablets. I put them in the lockbox in front of Shelby, and I made a small performance of the key, and I put it in the drawer where it always goes. Loretta went up at 9. She was in the front bedroom now because of the stairs, and I sat with her a while and we did not talk about anything. Wade came at 5 to 11 and stood in the hall in his work clothes, looking like a man who'd been called to a funeral he hadn't been told about. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "Stand there and don't say anything." At about 20 past 11, a car came up the road with its lights off and stopped short of the drive, and a man got out, and that was Dustin Rakes, and I'd never seen him before in my life. Shelby opened the kitchen door for him. She was in her dressing gown. She held the door, and she said something, and he laughed. The two units had been on Odell's side of the hedge since 10:30, with their lights off, and I'd known that since 6 o'clock. And I want to tell you that I felt something at that moment, and I did not. I felt like I was on a call. Rakes went to the drawer like a man who'd been told where the key was. He got the box out and set it on the counter, and Shelby was standing at the door with her arms folded. And my son made a sound behind me in the hall. Then the porch light came on. I have never seen anything happen that fast outside of work. The kitchen door was standing open, and there were people in that yard, from the hedge and from the road and from behind the shed, and somebody was saying, "State your name." And Rakes went down on the grass with the box still in his hands, and the lid came off it. 90 tablets across my backyard in the dark, and a deputy on his knees picking them out of the grass one at a time into a bag for 2 hours afterwards. Shelby did not run. She stood in my kitchen doorway in a dressing gown and said, "This is my house." And Wade said, "No, it isn't." That's the only thing my son said the entire night. She said there'd been a misunderstanding, and that she was helping a friend, and that Frank had asked her to sort out the old prescriptions, and she said it fast, and in the wrong order, and a woman deputy said, "Ma'am, ma'am," and got her hands behind her. She was on her knees on the kitchen step when she looked up and found me, and I watched her work it out. Not the arrest. She'd already understood the arrest. What she was working out was Sunday. The hospice nurse starting Thursday, which meant tonight or never. The full month, delivered Tuesday afternoon, announced at a table, with her sitting at it. The key going in the drawer in front of her. She'd spent 5 months certain she was managing a tired old man who'd been up all night and didn't see straight anymore. And she was finding out on her knees, in the dark, that the tired old man had signed 4,000 run sheets and had built her a Tuesday. Not one day of it had gone the way she thought it had. She said, "You set this up." I said the only thing I said to her that night. I said, 11 minutes. She didn't ask what I meant. That's the part Ray Guidry noticed too. Now, the rest of it, and I'll be quick, because the night is what matters and the rest is paperwork. Rakes gave her up in the car before they'd got him to the county line. He'd been buying from her for 14 months, and he named 2 other houses in the same trade. And that's the reason the county moved as hard as it did, because it stopped being about my wife by Thursday. Shelby was charged with diversion on multiple counts, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and neglect causing serious bodily harm for the 11 minutes on my kitchen floor. She fought all of it, and she lost. And she lost on 2 timestamps and a paramedic's handwriting. Villanueva came and gave evidence and read out her own line back to the room. Female, relative on scene states, patient fell about 5 minutes ago. 22 years, she'll be 65. Rakes took 15. The 2 other houses went the same autumn, and one of those women had been at it for 9 years. Wade wasn't charged. The money was a transfer between family accounts, and he'd taken it, and he'd never asked what was funding it, and there's no crime in that, and he has to carry it, and he does. He filed in November. He lives here still. He does the lifting now, which is the thing Shedia was right about. He and I have never once discussed the 30th of September. I expect we'll get to it in about 5 years or not at all. Loretta knows all of it. I told her in October, sitting on the bed, and she listened the whole way through, and then she said one thing, which was, "I knew about the tablets, Frank." She'd known since June. She hadn't said because she thought Wade would go to prison and it would be her fault for saying. So the two of us spent a summer each protecting the other one from the same fact. I have not got a clever thing to say about that. It's just what happened. And I think it happens in more houses than anybody would guess. The swing got finished in October. I'd had the frame hanging up on those chains since 2019 with no seat in it, and I did the slats in 11 days, working before 5, because I still wake at 4 and always will now. Loretta can sit in it about 11 minutes before the hip goes. I built it for 2 people, and most days I'm out there on my own with a coffee. She cuts my hair in it now. She's done my hair every 5 weeks for 46 years, at a kitchen chair, with a towel, and she can't stand at a chair long enough anymore. So we do it in the swing, and it takes 2 sittings, and she can't see the back properly. It's a bad haircut. I've had a bad haircut since October. I'm not going to a barber, and I'm not going to explain that to anybody. Odell Pryor came over in November with a bottle, and we sat out there and did not talk about any of it for 2 hours, which is the most useful thing anybody did for me all year. He said one thing at the gate on his way out. He said he wished he'd gone round and knocked. I told him the truth, which is that anybody would have done what he did, and that the 11 minutes are not his, and never were, and that if he hadn't looked at that clock, there'd have been no case at all. He still brings it up. I expect he will for the rest of it. And here's what it's got to do with you. When something happens in your house, somebody will tell you what happened. And most of the time they'll be telling you the truth. But there is almost always a second account of it, written down by a stranger with a clock, and nobody who's lying to you has ever once thought about it. The ambulance timestamps the call. The crew writes the room as they found it and what you said at the door, in your words, and signs it. The pharmacy logs the date. The hospital logs the arrival. All of it is a record, and if it's about you or about somebody you're the proxy for, it's yours, and it costs about 11 days and nothing. They took 90 tablets out of a dying woman's lockbox and $11,000 out of a joint account. And she got 22 years. And she got them because 2 young people in my kitchen wrote down what time they were called. So if something has happened in your house and the account of it has never quite sat right with you, ask for the record. Ambulance, hospital, pharmacy, whatever it was. Ask this week. You don't need a reason, and you don't need a lawyer, and nobody is going to ask you why. I signed 4,000 of those reports, and not one family ever asked me for a copy. Not one in 31 years. And look at what one of them did. She took nothing in the end. Not a tablet she kept, not a dollar she held on to, not one day of authority over either of us. She got 22 years, and she'll be 65 when she comes out, and she will never work anywhere near a pharmacy counter again as long as she lives. Rakes took 15. 2 other houses in this county stopped the same autumn because of what he said in the back of a car. All of that came out of 2 timestamps and a young woman's handwriting. Be the one who asks. Because look what one of them was worth. She took nothing in the end, and she got 22 years for it, and she'll be 65 when she comes out, and she will not work anywhere near a pharmacy counter again for the rest of her life. Rakes took 15. 2 other houses stopped that same autumn. And my wife takes her tablets at 8 and at 8. Every day, all 90 of them, counted by a nurse who signs for it. If this one stayed with you, give it a like and subscribe to True to See It Stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. There'll be a new one next week.